Okay, so to continue on from last Thursday's session, just to set you up for the next session, the nature and administration of feedback. Okay, so feedback is the final part of the information processing system, which I'll show you in the next slide. All the information that the performer receives is as a result of some form of their movement. Okay, so it can be internal or external, which again I'll show you on the next slide. So used to detect or correct errors during activity and make changes next time the skill is performed. So improving through feedback based on trial and error. So as well as changing and improving performance, it can actually show that we're doing the right thing and reinforce that and enhance motivation for further learning. Can learning occur without feedback? It's highly unlikely, but possible. Feedback does act as some sort of catalyst. So a catalyst is something that would speed up or slow down a reaction, so negative or positive. So it could make learning happen faster or slower. Difference between guidance and feedback, just have a little bit of a think. Okay, so guidance is something that's given before an action, and feedback is something that's after the action or the movement. Okay, so implications for there as coaches about how we actually do that within our sessions. Okay, so this is a very simple model of information processing. So you see at the top we have the input. Okay, so something will come into our brain through our senses. Majority of that information will come through the visual system in sport. That then goes into our brain, into the brain circuits, based on previous information or problem-solving skills. We'll come up with some sort of decision, and then there'll be some sort of output movement based on that. Feedback is the bit that tells you whether that was actually successful and needs to be repeated, or whether it needs to be adapted in future. Okay, a little bit more of a complex one. So this is McGill's classification for feedback. So you've got the feedback family. So we've got two types of feedback: sensory and augmented. Okay, so sensory is tactile, so through touch. Proprioceptive. Proprioception means your sense of where your body and your limbs are in space, so the feel of where they are when you're doing a movement. Auditory, obviously hearing, and visual through our eyes. Augmented feedback, knowledge of results, knowledge of performance. So we mentioned this in the last session. Knowledge of results is whether we were successful or not. So for example, for bowling in cricket, did the ball land in the right place and do the right thing? And knowledge of performance is how we conducted that. Okay, so maybe how the ball felt in terms of when it was actually released. So, augmented feedback provides the learner information from external sources, and it can be given verbally, or it might just be non-verbal communication, a nod, shake of the head, and it adds to that intrinsic feedback that comes from within the learner or the performer. So it can be concurrent. So during performance, the coach is constantly giving information, potentially want to avoid that when there may be some issues with that. Terminal, received at the end, okay, so feedback rather than kind of guidance, which possibly could be a more beneficial method depending on how soon after the performance is done, taking into account emotions of coaches and players at the time. It can provide knowledge of performance and knowledge of results. What does this mean? So knowledge of performance might be given by coaches towards correcting improper movement patterns, so some sort of technical correction. And knowledge of results given to the individual after completion of the response related to either the outcome of the response or performance characteristics. In other words, was it successful or not? Okay, so it might not necessarily mean scoring a goal, for example, but it might mean getting a shot on target, that sort of. So coach implications for us here. Coach needs to decide whether it's useful or not, depending on a number of factors. Some situations where it's not required. Sometimes, particularly with more advanced learners, intrinsic feedback would be enough because they've got enough information to be able to compare it to previous attempts. Obviously, with younger learners, novices, it might be more required. Okay, and too much augmented may make it a little bit of a crutch for that person, so they're always reliant on that information. Okay, so they can't think for themselves, in other words. So in a pressure situation, if the person's not there, the coach isn't there to tell them what to do, they're going to be in trouble. Okay, so you should try and foster independence in your learners. Okay, so out of these 3 stages of learning, so remember cognitive means thoughts, so that's your very conscious learner, the early stages. Associatives like your intermediate stage, so there's some sort of learning take place, but they're not yet expert. And then autonomous or automatic means that they can do it pretty much without thinking, so the expert phase of learning. So which one uses which type of feedback? The earlier stages tend to use extrinsic knowledge results. Okay, so and the autonomous, obviously intrinsic, due to more knowledge. So your autonomous expert athlete would have almost an encyclopedia built up mentally of all these different skills that they can compare what they're doing to and know whether it's successful. Okay, a learner or an associative athlete may need that information to help them build up that bank of information. Visual, verbal, mechanical guidance must be relevant to phase of learning. So mechanical guidance is basically moving an athlete's body parts into the right position. So something you do with a very young athlete, really foundation based. Visual might be again more of a cognitive associative learner because they've not yet got those pictures, whereas verbal may be good for autonomous, okay, because they have an understanding of what the things you're saying to them mean. Okay. Nature of the skill, so the more complex it is, the more information that's probably going to have to be given, and then how it can be transferred from a training session to actual competition. So that has implications with the conditions of practice, which we'll look at in the session on Thursday. Okay, so there's just to remind you stages of learning again. So cognitive beginner feedback tends to be extrinsic, knowledge of results, and then as we move up, it's more kinesthetic and intrinsic. Okay, so the feedback's more from within their own kind of lexicon, encyclopedia of knowledge. There, they don't have that, so they need that layered on by the coach. So one of the most common in practice environment might be verbal, just for ease really. Video analysis is more popular, depends really on the learner's skill levels. Okay, so it might be better with skilled performers more than novices. Don't want to overload them with information and time constraints. Obviously, it's a lot easier just to say things or show things on a tactics board than it is to go and edit videos and bring your iPad, computer, etc. in. Okay, frequency then. So augmented feedback. The content's critical, so it needs to be relevant. Okay, so it needs to be more precise with more advanced learners because obviously they can cope with more in-depth information. Maybe not after every attempt. Okay, give them a chance to trial and error and get it wrong themselves and see if they can correct. If it keeps going wrong, then you might step in and give them some help. Intermittent might be better than constantly being on them, and then as they get better, you can fade it out so you gradually reduce the amount of feedback. Okay, mentioned that one already. So sooner that it's given after the opponents, the better. So if you're talking about something that happened half an hour ago, they might not be able to see the relevance. So it's kind of coupling the two together. Okay, so a slight delay may be appropriate to let them to just think it over themselves. Okay, some other points, you can look at them yourselves. Okay, just have a read of those last few points. Okay, another little thing that the FA have got about is doing drive-bys. Okay, so you don't need to stop the entire group if there's only 1 or 2 learners that are actually struggling. So just target your feedback to those learners. Okay, some guidelines then. So probably do need some feedback of some description, whether it's augmented or encouraging intrinsic. Best at the end, terminal, possibly, as during may be off-putting. A little bit more with novices, okay, but not constant, and then fade it out as they improved. Focus on one thing, so have a kind of a theme perhaps, rather than just going off on a tangent and talking about things that are relevant. Remember that development is going to take thousands of hours, okay, so don't rush it. Feedback's good from different people, as long as you're singing from the same hymn sheet. It's nothing worse than you saying something and then someone saying the opposite afterwards. Okay, so some sort of reward for good performance, so praise, well done, might help to maintain effort and motivation, although be careful not to overdo it. And rather than just well done, what was well done? So that turn, the way you came out of that, the way you changed pace was really good, rather than just that was good. Okay, so can use both descriptive and prescriptive. So differentiate. So some people might need more information, some might need less, some might need more positives than others. Some might be able to stretch himself technically, some might not. Something called the PAT principle. P for pause, allow time to review and self-appraise so their intrinsic feedback can kick in. Ask them questions to enhance self-analysis rather than just telling them, and then tell them observations and how to